parents used my pregnant wife as a maid for a month while I was away for work, but that work could have helped them. My parents and I have always had a moderately close relationship, and up until a few months ago, we got along pretty well. But we stopped talking after an incident where they treated my wife like garbage. She was about 5 months pregnant at the time and hadn't had an easy pregnancy. By the second trimester, we knew she was expecting twins and was suffering from extreme morning sickness, to the point where she struggled to even stand up after throwing up. She also had varicose veins, felt fatigued and exhausted all the time, and that whole period can be described as rough for her. Then, I was offered a temporary position as a project manager, and it was a great opportunity because they were offering me a lot of money for only a month of work. My wife knew it was important to me, and the money would come in handy later, so she encouraged me to take it, even though I had doubts about leaving her home alone. I asked her parents to come stay with her for a few days while I was gone, just to make sure she was well taken care of. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible because her parents had their own business and couldn't find anyone to cover for them. So, in the end, I ended up asking my own parents to move into my house for a month to take care of my wife because I didn't want her to be alone. To my relief, they happily agreed, and since they'd always had a good relationship with her, I didn't think there would be any problems. But now we all know there were. During the first 2 weeks I was away, my wife sounded pretty normal. But then I started to notice she sounded very tired all the time and was more irritable with me. I didn't understand what was going on. I even asked her if she wanted me to come back earlier, after 2 weeks, but she insisted I stay because this was important for me. I thought her mood swings were due to hormones, so I didn't push it. Finally, after a month, I came home. A couple of days later, my parents left. During that time, I could sense that something hadn't gone right between my wife and my parents because the atmosphere was very tense since I arrived. Finally, when they left, my wife and I had a conversation about what had happened. She told me she hadn't told me anything before because she didn't want to worry me while I was working and wanted me to be able to focus on my job. But now that I was back, she wanted me to know that my parents had been absolutely horrible to her. Even though she constantly told them she couldn't do many chores, they didn't care and made her work like a maid. Instead of helping her, which was the reason I asked them to stay with her in the first place, they made her work twice as much as she would have if she'd been alone. She ended up doing all the housework because my parents complained they were too old to do it, which isn't true. In their own house, they do everything themselves because they don't like spending money on housekeepers. It's not like they aren't used to doing it. They also knew my wife was having a complicated pregnancy, so the least they could have done was help her instead of making her work even more. And as if that wasn't enough, they went out of their way to create more chores for her, telling her that staying active was the only way to have a healthy pregnancy and delivery. They told her that if she got lazy, things would be even worse for her. My wife didn't want to waste her energy arguing with them, so she ended up doing everything they asked. Every day she ended up exhausted and just wanted them to leave, but she didn't want to be rude, so she put up with it until I got back. Now, she wanted to stay away from them for a while. Obviously, I got very upset when I heard this and went to talk to my parents immediately. They didn't deny it. They said my wife was being paranoid and hysterical and that there was nothing wrong with what they'd done, even though the doctors had told us she shouldn't overexert herself. They said they'd seen plenty of pregnancies in their lives and didn't believe in that overblown nonsense. They told us we were being too soft, and instead of trying to understand my point of view, they told me I should thank them for doing my wife a favor by not letting her lie around all day. After saying all that, we had one of the biggest arguments, if not the biggest. After that, we stopped talking. They weren't present at the birth of my twins, which I'm grateful for, because the way they treated my wife was very wrong. Unless they apologized to both of us, especially my wife, I didn't want anything to do with them. With that in mind, they recently showed up at my house trying to see the babies. I told them they weren't welcome until they apologized. Still, They made a scene in front of my house because they were the grandparents and needed to be in contact with their grandchildren, even if I made up excuses. I told them that no matter what they thought, I wasn't going to see them. Finally, my dad said he was my father and wasn't going to let his son disrespect him like this. He told me that someday I would regret this. The only thing I regret is asking them for this favor, not what my dad is complaining about. I might be the bad guy, but even if I am, I don't want my parents seeing my kids or near my wife. What do you guys think? Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe. New stories every day. Update 1. My wife and I talked about whether we want our kids around my parents. I didn't want to make the decision on my own. She said she'd support whatever decision I made, but she'd want to stay away from them for a while, at least. I told her my mind was made up. They're staying away from our kids and her. And me, too, but I wasn't the one they mistreated during my work trip. So the decision to keep them away stands, as my wife and I are on the same page about keeping my parents as far away as possible. It's not that I don't think my kids should have grandparents. We have my in-laws for that, who can be good enough grandparents to make up for my parents. Now that that's out of the way, I want to clear some things up because of some comments I've seen. Some people bluntly said I was being selfish by asking my parents to stay with my wife for a month to take care of her without offering them anything in return. Let me say, first of all, it wasn't an obligation. They definitely could have said no. I just casually asked, as a favor, and made it very clear it was a favor. I couldn't offer them anything because we'd been saving money for months for the babies, and besides, they're my parents, so I didn't think I'd have to pay them. But even if they'd asked, I don't think I would have refused. In fact, if they had refused, I wouldn't have left my wife home alone while pregnant and struggling to do things for herself. I know a lot of people commented that my wife was exaggerating and my parents were right, and I should actually be grateful to them. But I think the doctors, my wife, and I know what we're doing. Her doctor told her not to overexert herself, and that's what we were trying to ensure. So even if my parents had declined to stay with her, we would have found a way to hire someone, like a housekeeper, a maid, or a nurse to be with her and help her with the chores. Or if that was too expensive, I would have turned down the job. But I decided to rely on my parents because they agreed to stay and because I knew they had a good relationship with my wife. I didn't see any of this coming. They knew all about her difficulties, the medical advice she'd been given, and I told them myself how I wanted them to help her. But they ignored all of that and did what they wanted. If they didn't believe in anything her doctor said, they should have said so before I left, not after. If their plan from the beginning was to make her life more difficult, they should have just refused instead of putting my wife through all of that. Just because their experience with pregnancies was limited, they decided they knew more than the doctors. They ignored everything we told them and dismissed every one of my wife's complaints. She was in really bad shape during that month, and for a couple of weeks afterward, she was so exhausted she could barely do anything. So it's not like we didn't suffer the consequences of what they put her through. And not once did they apologize. So, if anyone still believes I'm the selfish one just because I asked them for help, I have nothing more to say. Because I know for sure that if they'd refused to stay with my wife, it wouldn't have bothered me. But the fact that they completely ignored what we asked, did things their way regardless of how harmful it was to others, and then never apologized and acted as if they'd been right all along, that is true arrogance to me. But oh well, it doesn't matter anymore. I've made my decision and I'm not going to contact them to fix our relationship. At least for now. I'm busy with my wife, my babies, our family. And for now, everything else can wait. Update 2. It's been 2 months since the babies were born and about a month since I last spoke to my parents. After I told them at the door that I didn't want to talk to them and to leave, they didn't try to contact me again. Until yesterday. At first, I felt a little weird about the situation, but honestly, I didn't have much time to worry about them. I was busy with work, chores, taking care of the babies, and everything else, so I really had a lot on my mind, and I ended up completely forgetting about the issue with my parents. For a while, things were quiet, but yesterday they called me again. Since I didn't answer the first few times, because I was asleep, they decided to leave me a message saying they had something important to discuss with me and that I needed to call them back as soon as possible. So, as soon as I woke up, I checked my phone and thought about it for a moment before calling them back because I considered that maybe they were sick or something, and I didn't want to risk ignoring something important. I'm not on good terms with them right now, but they're still my parents, and I'm their only child. So, for that reason, I called them. But the call was to let me know that it had been a month since I'd treated them so poorly, which is how they viewed the situation, and they'd been waiting for me to see my mistake for myself and fix it. They told me things in life don't fix themselves, and the person who made the mistake should realize that and find a way to repair what they did. That's what people who live in society do, in a civilized manner. My mom told me I was being very selfish and she didn't expect this kind of behavior from me, adding that my dad had been very upset these past few weeks. They said they'd been waiting for me to call them, but since I never did, suddenly my mom started blaming my wife for all of this. She told me she was pretty sure my wife was the one trying to push them away, because even while they were staying with her and trying to do their best for her, they felt like she didn't appreciate their presence there. She said the upbringing they'd given me was more important than for a mere wife to destroy everything. But despite all that, it still wasn't too late. We could still fix things by arranging a meeting to talk about the matter. I could have accepted the meeting thing, as long as they were these people who live in a civilized world and need to make amends. But playing the victim was ruining everything as always, and I wasn't going to meet with them to hear their "we're the good guys, you're the bad guy, now apologize or suffer our wrath" speech. So, while we were talking on the phone, I told them I had no intention of fixing things with them because, evidently, they were still living in a bubble of denial. I told them that we were the ones waiting for an apology, but that apology never came, and instead we got more demands. I asked them directly if they'd be willing to apologize to my wife, and it didn't take them long to say no. They were about to give me an explanation of why they weren't going to do it, but I talked over them and said that since they'd said no, just as I expected, then I didn't need to hear anything else. While they were still trying to talk, since I'd stopped saying anything, I just hung up on them. Afterward, I told my wife about the call. She looked a little sad and told me she found it pitiful how they were acting. Something I agree with. She said what really saddened her was the fact that before all this, she actually got along very well with them, so it's not like she wasn't open to a reconciliation. And she was right. If they just said they were sorry, we would have made an effort to repair our relationship. But they're still stubborn and justify what happened, so we're never going to agree with them, and we're never going to be able to repair our relationship. Our decision now is that unless they come with an apology, we're not going to interact with them in any way. No calls, no messages, nothing at all. I think that's the best way to handle the situation right now because, otherwise, they're just not going to get it. If they want a relationship with us and the babies, they'll have to apologize. There's no other option. If they don't like it, it's not my problem. I think their speech has a lot of truth to it, except they have the wrong people. Update 3. Hi everyone, it's been 2 weeks since my last update, and after that phone call, my parents tried to contact me several more times by text and email, but we've stuck to our decision. If they weren't offering an apology, then they weren't going to get a response, simple as that. At first, during the first week, I read their messages and emails every few days, but when I realized they were just trying to justify themselves and cover up what they'd done, I stopped reading them altogether. It's likely the other messages are similar. Up to now, they had only messaged me but avoided interacting with my wife entirely. In a way, that was a good thing because I didn't want them talking to her, especially knowing what they thought of her at the moment, so it seemed better to me that they not have any contact. But then, a couple of days ago, they decided to send her a message to insult her, because you can't call what they said anything else. They sent her a text message around 9 in the morning, which is an absurd time to send such an offensive message like the one they sent her. although any time is equally bad. Basically, they repeated what they'd told me on the phone, that they blamed her for the way I was behaving now, as if she was the one dictating what I have to do. They told her it was very nasty of her to be manipulating me into believing they'd treated her poorly when, in reality, according to them, all they tried to do was help her. And to top it all off, they demanded she apologize to them and tell me the truth, that they had only tried to help her and that she, being a lazy sow, hadn't appreciated it and hadn't even tried to understand that their intentions were good. They said she had intentionally misinterpreted their actions, made them look like the bad guys in a poorly told story, and was now continuing to manipulate me to turn against them. My wife was pretty upset by the message in the morning, and after she showed it to me, I decided to call my parents to say something. But, surprisingly, this time it was them who tried to avoid me. Probably, they knew I wasn't going to be happy about this and that this was only going to make the situation even worse for them. But I didn't give up. I wanted to say something to them, just as they were so free to say what they wanted, so I called them several times. Finally, after almost 10 minutes, they answered the phone. My dad was the one who answered, and the first thing he said was that if I was calling to talk about the message they'd sent my wife, then it was pointless because they weren't willing to discuss it. According to him, at the end of the day, they knew what they'd said was the truth, and if I got defensive, it would only prove they were right, that my wife was really manipulating me and trying to turn me against them. At that moment, I'm sure they thought they had me cornered, but honestly, I didn't care about their opinion at all. I just told them they couldn't be more wrong and explained the situation to them with complete clarity, that my wife had never prevented me from talking to them, and that it had been my decision not to. The fact that they were trying to blame her for all of this was not only incredibly foolish of them but also ridiculous because now they were only making themselves look like jerks. After the disrespect they'd already shown my wife, they were only sinking themselves deeper with this. So now, I'm cutting them out of my life completely. Before this, we were still willing to accept their apologies and try to repair our relationship if they'd come around and sincerely apologized. But now, there were no more chances. They said that they were the ones who removed the possibility of fixing this with an apology, but now the only way to repair the relationship was with a divorce. Maybe later, if I apologized, they'd accept me back. But there was no way to fix things with my wife because that was beyond any kind of repair. This happened a couple of days ago, and after that, we didn't talk again until today. They couldn't contact us because I blocked them, and my wife did too. Which was all good, because the world was better without the possibility of contact from my parents. But then, this morning, my parents showed up at our door. And once again, they chose the morning, 8 a.m. to be exact, to be annoying again. Now, this is the time I usually leave for work, and even though my wife is working from home right now, that doesn't mean she's sitting around doing nothing. We're both busy the rest of the day, so we like to make the most of this time before we start work, and we really don't like interruptions. So, when they arrived, we were determined not to open the door at all. We just pretended we weren't home. I know, it's not the most mature thing to do, but we didn't want to interact in any way. But the more we ignored them, the louder they got, and after a while, the babies started to fuss and cry. So I had no choice but to open the door to talk to them. By that point, I was very annoyed, so when I opened the door, I told them my shoe had a new home and it would be up their asses if they didn't leave right now. They may be my parents, but at that point, I was seeing red. We argued a bit because they didn't take it well, but I don't know what they expected making noise so early when babies would surely be sleeping. But after we all calmed down, they informed me why they had come. They didn't come here to apologize or demand one. They were just there to inform me that they, too, had decided to cut us out of their lives. My mom told me they'd thought about it and decided I was a lost cause too, so the decision was the most mature thing for them to do. And to try to make their announcement more dramatic, they had decided to leave their inheritance to my cousins. They told me it was very unfortunate that they'd never had other children, that they'd always thought that as long as they had me, they wouldn't have to worry about things like this. But now, since I'd started obeying my wife more, it was clear they'd made a serious mistake in betting on a single horse. This phrase isn't a coincidence for my parents because they've always liked horses and bet from time to time, so all my life I've heard phrases related to them. I told them straight up that they were right about that they weren't my priority. My wife and children were my main priority right now, and if they couldn't respect or understand that, then maybe it was best if we really cut each other out of each other's lives. That way, we'd get out of this toxic relationship we'd been living in for weeks and months. That made them explode with fury because they were using all this for me to beg them for forgiveness or something, but they didn't get it. They told me they had already spoken to a lawyer, that this was serious, and that they had started the process to change their will. To which I replied, let them do what they have to do. I couldn't care less who they leave their will to. They left muttering things like I was going to come crawling back needing the inheritance and stuff like that, but I didn't care because they were leaving, and I wasn't going to give them any more conversation to make them stay. The next time they show up like this, I'm calling the cops. Update 4. Everything has been quiet for 3 months, no further contact, no interaction between us. I didn't even know if they'd changed the will or if it was just a threat, but I didn't bother to find out either. Today, by coincidence, we ended up at the local supermarket at the same time and came face to face. It was super awkward. We were perfectly fine when we saw them, just decided to ignore them and walk by, but they decided to make a show of the situation, deliberately turned their faces away, refused to look at us, and acted as if we were contaminated or something. I knew their intention was to make us uncomfortable or make us feel bad, but we found it pretty funny. It's sad they're being so immature about all this because, at the end of the day, the only ones losing out are them. They're missing out on spending time with their grandchildren and their only son. I don't know to what extent my cousins will take care of them in their old age, even if they leave them their inheritance. My cousins aren't people who take much care of my aunts and uncles, so I see a similar outcome for my parents. Update 5. Wow, it's been a while since I wrote here. I had to look up my last update to realize it's been almost 3 years. Time flies when you have kids. Now, at 3 years old, they're practically a couple of whirlwinds tearing through the house. But my parents have also had a whirlwind in their home, only in their case, it's debt. Yes, that's why I mentioned my kids earlier, to connect it to my parents' situation. This time, my mom came to my house alone, without my dad, because, according to her, she wanted everything to be kept on a calm level. Besides, she didn't know if my dad would agree to her contacting me. She told me the story of how they'd lost a lot of money on horses in the last few years, which also explains why she came alone, as my dad had made the bigger bets. He used to joke with my mom, saying that if they won a lot of money, I'd come crawling back because their inheritance would be too tempting to refuse. That's why my mom believed my dad would never agree to ask me for help because he wasn't going to be the one crawling. I asked her what I could do for her on this beautiful day, at 8 a.m., again, because as far as I knew, my cousins were now their irresponsible heirs. After all, they'd left their entire will to them, so their doors were the ones they should be knocking on now. She told me there would be no inheritance anymore because their savings were completely gone. But she also explained that they'd never changed the will, that they'd only said it as a threat to see if I'd react. So, technically, I was still in the will, but now I needed to help them because things were really bad. I don't understand why I should help now, since I wasn't even going to get an inheritance, though, this time, because there simply wasn't anything to inherit. But my mom replied that the house was still there. Then, the logical thing would be for them to stop spending on horses, start saving again, and get on with their lives. At least they still had a roof over their heads. But my mom corrected me and said the house would be foreclosed on by the bank if they didn't pay close to $12,000 in 2 months. That wasn't all the debt, but it was enough to delay the sale. If I heard correctly, my mom wanted me to help them with $12,000 so that maybe, in the future, I could inherit the house, as long as they didn't remove me from the will if I didn't do what they wanted. No, I don't think that's the best thing for me. My mom insisted that I should at least help them since, thanks to the month they stayed at my house, I was able to get a better salary. But I think my mom is referring to when they treated my wife like a maid instead of taking care of her. And then, when I came back, I had to take care of everything because she was exhausted both from the pregnancy and from the month of forced labor they subjected her to. After my mom left, I guess my dad found out about the conversation because he called me from a friend's phone. I didn't recognize the number. It was just to yell at me that somehow they were going to save the house and that they would never allow it to end up in my hands, or in the hands of my wife or my children, because we didn't deserve to live there. I replied that, according to the bank, neither did they. It's been an intense interaction with my parents after years of not hearing from them. We'd only run into each other at some restaurant or supermarket, but on those occasions, we each pretended the other didn't exist. Update 6. My parents have lost the house, and as far as I know, they've decided to move in with a cousin of my dad's who can give him work while keeping him away from the racetrack. I'm fine with that because it means I won't have to see their saggy asshole faces every time we cross paths somewhere. That was exactly the expression they made when they saw us anywhere in town, so, in a way, this solves a lot of things. As you can see, I don't particularly like faces with such a strange composition.